Hey, what's happening? Welcome to Mates TV. So, a third part in our quadrilogy of videos talking about Liverpool's midfield issues rolls around the DM slot and to Fabinho and the potential of players that we could be looking at if we wanted to replace or bolster his place within the Liverpool squad. The player I'm going to focus mainly on here is Declan Rice, but I want to chat a little bit about Moises Caceido in there as well. If you've got any players that you feel would be suitable comparison points, then let me know in the comment section underneath, of course. But obviously what I've done in part one is to talk about the broad problems facing Liverpool's recruitment team and the management in trying to refresh Liverpool's midfield. I also talked last time out about why Bellingham may not be quite the fit that we think he is in terms of replacing Jordan Henderson or the idea of Jordan Henderson. He then went on after doing that, a really good first World Cup game against Iran. He's clearly a talent. He's clearly a ridiculous talent. Let's not get too bogged down in it. We could do Bellingham videos for days. It's great to see him and Trent Alexander-Arnold hanging out and being busy mates. That bodes excruciatingly well. But look, I want to talk because obviously the England midfield been really interesting, and the midfield options that have been available to them, particularly the fact that we saw the first two World Cup games with Declan Rice in the DM. We saw Jude Bellingham on the right of the midfield three, and then we saw Mason Mount on the left of the midfield three, or was it the other way around? It doesn't really matter. The point is the three lads who've been heavily linked with Liverpool played the first two good games for England in the midfield to varying degrees of success. Now, again, I've talked about Bellingham ad nauseum. I'll give him a break on this for a little bit. I'll talk about Mason Mount probably in the next part when we come to talk about Thiago. But yeah, I want to focus on the DM. And as mentioned last time, some of this does link into the Jordan Henderson thing, because when I talk about how you replace Jordan Henderson, I speculated that they might have already done that with Harvey Elliott, and maybe in having the likes of Carvalho as well. There's a possibility that that's quite well sewn up in terms of really progressive footballers who are more, definitely closer to 10s than they are to 6s, whereas Jordan Henderson in the last couple of seasons, and really over his time since Jurgen Klopp's been there, has been very much an 8/6, a 6/8, rather than an 8/10. And in losing Gini Wijnaldum, it put more emphasis on needing Jordan Henderson to be cover for the 6 role. And when he's had some injury issues and he's getting towards the twilight of his career, do Liverpool need to make sure they've got more and better options to cover the defensive side of things? And I think that's one of the big problems. And I've talked about Moises Caceido in terms of what he brings. He's a bit more dynamic than Fabinho. He plays more progressive passes. But, and this is a big issue, and I don't want to feel like I'm being heightist in any way, and I need to clarify my thoughts on these, because I've mentioned the physical side, the height side of things on a lot of videos. He's a bit small. And I think you can get away with having footballers who aren't like giants. Of course you can, but you've got to be exceptional. You've got to be exceptional at the things you do. Footballers got tons of examples of really small, incredibly gifted footballers who made it at the highest level and won absolutely everything. Literally the greatest players ever play football of all time is tiny. And whether you think it's Maradona, was tiny. Says Fabregas, small for a midfielder. Javier Mascherano, small for a midfielder, even smaller for the centre-half. Puyol, not massive. Cannavaro, not massive. Small guys. Apologies if I think some of them might be like 5'10", which is a perfectly, I think, the average height. But when you look at what is interesting, speaking to and this is about goalkeepers, but speaking to John Achterberg, and they talk about the model for goalkeepers, and it's like 6'1" and above. You know, there's a fit for what you're looking for, because ideally what every club wants is guys who are 6 foot as like almost like a base level, really. A couple of positions will be exceptions to this, but if you can find all of the skills that you're looking for your particular position, and the person happens to be over 6 foot as well, then you're gonna aim to get that. And that's why ultimately, like, look at centre forwards. Complete centre forwards cost ridiculous sums of money, because to be really good at finishing, really fast, really strong, really good in the air, and all the great reading and great movement of it, like, there's a ridiculous amount of things required to be the complete centre forward, because we've seen it. There are limitations to what a small guy is going to do in certain instances in a game, with exceptions to that rule. Anyway, I'm getting sidetracked by this, but my point is, and I made this point on the last week video, is if you've got a midfield that already contains, moving on from last week's, Harvey Elliott. So Harvey Elliott is now your right side of your midfield three. And the plan to be, let's say to be, that is for 5 years. This kid's going to go on and be an absolute superstar of the game. So he's nailed on Liverpool's right side of midfielder, just for talking sake. And let's say you want to keep Thiago, because in terms of his absolute skill set, there's very few players on the planet who you can match for that. And he's brilliant. And he's just such an incredible talent. So you're keeping him in, and maybe we'll look to alter that in next week's video. You DM, and for talking sake, let's say you decide you want to move Fabinho on, or you want to upgrade, or you want to get someone else in who can fight for him in that position. If you put someone like Caceido in, who's probably about he's 5'10" at the very most. I suspect he's probably more like 5'9". You put that in, you've got a very short midfield. And if you're playing technical football, brilliant brand of incredible technical football, and you've got loads of aggression in there, you can get away with a bunch of those things. But it's stupid little things that we don't really consider, because we get so lost in the football of it and the beauty of the ball and open play and, you know, passing and moving and technical gifts, that we forget that sometimes you come against lads from corners and from set pieces who are all 6'4" groks who want to eat your face, and you can fight and you can be great, dominant in the air without being over 6 foot. But the balance of probabilities leans against you inevitably. If you're giving up 2 stone to someone and 6 inches in height, you're going to lose. Eventually you're going to lose, or you're going to lose in key moments, or you're going to lose and it's going to be less in your control, because, you know, again, in boxing terms, it's a bit of a mismatch. And again, plucky underdogs can win, of course they can, but the law of averages towards the people who've got the physicality on their side. So that's a consideration. So the player that comes round to is Declan Rice. And obviously the concern we've got, before I kind of touch on him with Fabinho, is this season he looks like he's fallen off a cliff. That is very recoverable. He's the youngest of the midfield that we're talking about phasing out on Liverpool's side at 29. She's not young, but it's also not old. As a DM, he should have years ahead of him, where he's still very much on top. I mean, for God's sake, Fernandinho made it to 37. Okay, the last 2 seasons were hardly vintage Fernandinho, but and also he's quite small. But the point is that yeah, you should have lots more in the tank. So it's a question of, do you need to get someone to kind of do a simulcast job for him, where he comes in and helps him out and gives him a couple of games off. Maybe he plays a third of the games and Fabinho plays 2/3 of the games, and that gives you the better Fabinho for 2/3. I would suggest that was probably the thinking, or it would have been the thinking a year or 18 months ago. I wonder if that thinking's changed a little, but that thinking is important to how Liverpool go about filling that position, because to bring it forward to Declan Rice, you know, is a 23-year-old guy clearly ready to make that next step in his career. West Ham are not going to have a better season than what they had last year. That is, like, not to ruin the illusion of football or whatever, but it'd be very unlikely for David Moises to make that West Ham side much better than what they got last season. They're already struggling a little bit this year. I'm sure that will average out a bit, and if they stick with him, they'll average out in a wider sense. My concerns over Declan Rice, and a lot of these are the eyeball test, so I've got some of the stats up as well to go through. My instant feeling of watching him, and I've watched all 3 of the England group games in the opening stages of the World Cup, and I've seen him play against Liverpool a couple of times, and I've watched YouTube compilations for days, and he looks quite impressive in the YouTube compilations on one particular point, which is his major difference between him and Fabinho and how they play according to the stats. My concern with him is I don't know that he's technically gifted enough for Liverpool's midfield. And I'm sat here, as to caveat all of the chats we ever have about football, I'm sat here as a near, middle-aged man. There was a goalkeeper who didn't even have the technical abilities to play outfield in his school team. I was good enough to play goal for his school team, but I wasn't good enough to play outfield. Apart from that one game when I came off the bench and played right back because we had no one else and had a worldie. I say this in so much, I need to see a little bit more context, but I am watching him alongside Jude Bellingham, who looks a perfect technical fit for Liverpool, and Mason Mount, sorry, who I'll talk about next week, who I've been a little underwhelmed with as well, to be fair. And then when you see Phil Foden, you go, my God, yeah, him, that is the sort of level. Okay, I think that I don't think you need to be an absolute, like, you don't need to be a number 10 to play at in the DM for Liverpool. And what type of DMs are in vogue definitely changes every few years. You know, around the end of Sir Alex Ferguson at Man United, and you know, toward the tail end of Gerrard's career, the creative DM, you know, was very much a thing. Michael Carrick was doing it at Manchester United. Xabi Alonso was still going, and would he have been at Real or Bayern by that point? Steven Gerrard was drafted in as DM, and having guys who were pulling the strings, quarterbacks from DM, was very much a thing. Prior to that, you had Claude Makelele, the Makelele role, you know, your little terrier tearing around the place. There comes a point where N'Golo Kante kind of brings that back a little bit as well. But what we've seemed to have settled on in the last few years is, as you know, as Liverpool described, and this was the lighthouse. Rodri saw Fabinho, Man City saw what Liverpool had done with Fabinho and went out and got their own one in Rodri. And by that, what I mean is between 6'2" and 6'4" DM, good, solid technical skills, really good at recycling the ball, keeping possession moving, great reading of the game, so you can really play high up the pitch. Cut out those breakaway passes, looking to, you know, to transition them from back foot to counter attack. And you know, the ultimate thing as well is that once we put Virgil van Dijk in place, you're not getting it over him. But if you can cut that before you even get to Van Dijk, then you're winning the ball back 15, 20, 25 yards further up the pitch, which helps you contain them in even more. So having two big guys through the spine of your team really, really helps keep the pressure off your defence in a number of ways. Now, Declan Rice ticks those boxes. You know, he's the same, I think he's pretty much the same height, or thereabouts. In fact, I've got it here. He's fractionally, there's fractions in it. There's 3 centimetres in it. He's 3 centimetres smaller than Fabinho. Okay, sound. 6'2" then, ish. That's okay. He's a similar build. In fact, it's got him, soccerment.com has him as being heavier. Cool. The physicality, good thing. He's not quite as good in the short pass as Fabinho, which I think is a little concern. And my worry about him is how ungainly he can look at times. But then this is the interesting difference between stats and the eyeball test, is that you can feel that some players that have been ungainly, but in reality, if they are being effective with it, then it doesn't really matter. And one of the things that he does, he gets more recoveries, and it's the dribbles thing. You know, it's not significantly more than Fabinho, and Fabinho hasn't had a good season this season. I think Declan Rice has ticked on really well. When you watch highlight reels of Declan Rice, it's him slaloming past people and through, and it does worry me a touch, that, because I remember Harry Maguire having these kind of things. I remember Sky doing a huge package on how creative Harry Maguire was, how technically gifted he was, what a great dribbler he was, and I always felt it was a bit like, oh wow. Like, when again, go back to my playing days, if you're playing against people who are loads worse than you, you know, I had a bit of a parlour trick where I used to, like, take the ball and run down the wing. I'd do that in training and score, but I did it in a match once against better people, and it got caught out on the halfway line at the right wing and basically got lobbed. From there, my point is, when you're playing in a kids' party, you're playing against kids, you can all the tricks you can pull out and look amazing. I'm a little concerned that there's an element of surprise, I think, that comes sometimes where you don't expect a DM or someone who looks or carries himself like Declan Rice to be able to dribble. So does the unknown quantity of it, does that boost his dribbling stats a little bit? And when you're playing for someone like Liverpool and you're scouted to the nth degree and everything you're going to do is known by your opponents, does that kind of get shut down? Which is kind of what happened to Harry Maguire. You can get away with it at Leicester. You can't get away with it at United. That's my fear on Rice, but that might be completely unfounded. He does seem to have quite decent close control, and if we're looking for an example of where that's totally, like, wrong, Joel Matip. And Matip failed the eyeballs. He looks so uncomfortable, so ungainly, but now we make t-shirts about him and, like, you know, and banners and songs and catchy little phrases using the word adventure where we talk about Joel Matip striding forward with the ball. So my point on this is it's possible. I have a slight concern over Rice because he doesn't look elegant enough, but and this goes back to, and I think this will be highlighted even further in the next episode, if we're looking to get more creativity through the middle of the park, then we need more brutality at the base of it. And I think Fabinho's been lacking that in the games where he has been on it, on fire, physical, fighting for it. The one I've referred to too many times this season is the second half against Ajax, where he just decided he was in a fight and he was brilliant as a result of it. That we need more of that in our midfield. And my concern is, and I've mentioned this in a couple of the other positions, and it will continue to rise, Thiago's tigerish and Harvey Elliott works really hard, which helps. But I think if you want to unleash more creativity, then you need perhaps more of a stopper in DM. And that might require a little bit of a tactical shift, and it might be different to what we've come to expect. But someone like Declan Rice, ultimately, he might be being slightly less silky and slightly more agricultural, might be what we're crying out for. I'm not sure that it is, and I don't have a terrific number of other candidates, if I'm being perfectly honest. It's why Jordan Henderson works so well in there, is that he is a silkier version of Fabinho. My concern is that if you're getting someone who's a less silky version, and all of a sudden, you know, yes, you've still got your physicality, but it's the trade-off. You lose silkiness for physicality, and when you gain silkiness, you lose physicality, and you end up with a bunch of short guys who are really technically gifted, and then you end up with a bunch of big guys who are technically gifted, and then your team loses something across the board. Is it better to have a middle bracket of guys who are quite technically gifted and quite physical? Honest answer is I don't know on that one, but that's a big test facing Liverpool in the coming years. I don't think it was as expected, but equally, I'm saying that Tchouaméni was clearly top of the list in the summer. It's been identified. Certain players at Liverpool need understudies, and that I don't think you're looking to chuck Fabinho out. I don't think you're looking to throw the baby out with the bathwater on half a bad season, but it might be indicative of a little bit more. He's played a lot of football in recent years. He's had injury problems, and you can't afford to rely on a 33-year-old Jordan Henderson as your understudy, or a just turned 18 Stefan Bajcetic. We might need someone in the next window, possibly, certainly in the next two, who can come in and either take over from Fabinho, who's better than him, or be good enough to really push him in training and see if we can jumpstart Fabinho back to the player that we know he can be for Liverpool. Yeah, thoughts in the comments below on that. Do we need to just get a new DM in, or do you feel like Fabinho will come better after the World Cup once that distraction is out of the way? Do you think he'll be better with having someone push him in training? We've seen it with Andy Robertson, looks brilliant when he comes in for his games that he plays after Kostas Tsimikas. We'll see what's happening with Trent with the arrival of Ramsey. We've seen it countless with midfielders come in, Jordan Henderson, you know, Gini Wijnaldum, James Milner, all went up levels when guys were brought in to contend with them for their places. Anyway, the 888 Sport team are talking about the most legendary the most legendary World Cup player. Yeah, I'm sure that'll come up at some point in the future. But on brand for the moment, legendary World Cup player. I think I'm going to go and do a big shout for Roger Milla, because, wow, like doing the corner flag dance and stuff, yeah, like iconic moments of my very formative days as a football fan. But I'll play the clip out. Head over to the 888 Sport channel, leave a comment, say mate sent you in there as well, and drop a like on it as well. That'd be great. More from me. Anything you want to bring up when we're talking about Thiago next time? Who should Liverpool be targeting to be the long-term Thiago replacement? Let me know in the comments section underneath. And other than that, have an amazing weekend. Your sound, and I'll see you all soon. Ta-ra.
Roger Milla, number one, no doubt.
That's what I said, like, you know, like 94, Stoichkov completely captured my imagination.
Fantastic.
There are certain players that step out of this mould and go, in a World Cup, and they really sort of just inspire you.
Should Bergkamp be in there?
Well, Bergkamp,
go alone.
But okay, someone we're missing.
Sorry,
Roberto Baggio.
Sorry, Ab, I realise you are only 4 when we're talking about these players. We got to bring that.
But one Abby will remember that we've not got on the list, who's a World Cup winner, and we know who broke our hearts is Ronaldinho.
Yeah.
Could we go against this list then? For once on this show, you know, we've got the 7 or the 8. Could we go against and add the real players then? Like, should Ronaldinho be on this list?
Yes.
Are we just changing the...
Are we just changing the format?
I think so.
You're the leader, Rory.
Are we just
You're
changing...
the guy, Rory.
Should we just completely change
Can we
it?
just rip up the script?
Everybody do what you want. This is normally at the beginning. I'm going to take the hit from the producers and everybody at 888 Sport. This is on me. I hope we're going to get away with this. Fingers crossed. Everybody make a list of players that they adore in the World Cup. See, this is why I love it. The nostalgia and romanticism of football. This is what I'm in it for.
This is it.
Right, this is the list.
We don't have to agree then.
This is the real quiz.
We don't have to agree. Okay. It really is.
Totally making it up
This
as
is
we go
why,
along.
this is
It
why
never
everyone in the
happens.
comments is shouting at us now with their love. Just put your love in the comments. This is why we love football.